Continental Army arrived here 19th of December 1777, and this was the third of 8 winter encampments for the Continental Army. Little known fact, American Revolution is the longest major U.S. war in history up to Vietnam. You're talking about 12,000 people approximately, not only soldiers, but about 250 to 400 women who are following their husbands and sweethearts, often with children in tow. There are some children who are acting as combatants or even as drummers, providing the signals to the Army that are with them, and artificers who are equipping and maintaining some pieces for some equipment for the Army. So, for example, the artillery here. So they're coming in here. You're talking about a population the size of a major city in the colonies.
Wow.
So 12,000 people roughly overnight swamped this area. Boston, the third largest population in what was British North America, on the eve of Revolution, they had 15,000 residents. This is a massive logistical undertaking. And there's practically no real infrastructure for this. Congress had to start from scratch and kind of make it up as they went. This area here, Valley Forge encompasses about 3,500 acres. The vast majority of it was a community of Welsh American Quaker farmers. About 18 families. You might hear a different number depending, because you had fathers owning one patch of land and sons owning another, but it's roughly that. They are growing grains, producing breads, and they're part of what's called a truck farming industry, meaning that any farmers within, say, a 20-mile radius of Philadelphia, we're 18 miles away. Philadelphia is southeast of here, and roughly in that direction. They would, especially before the war, take goods to market twice a week to sell it, and it'd be regulated markets they're selling it. So, I mean, these are things.
When you say regulated markets, what?
Like the prices are standardized.
Okay.
Or they're overseen.
Because see, our kids have talked about economy. We're talking about global economy right now. We also were learning about the colonies and the fact that this was considered the breadbasket because of the grains that were grown in the middle colonies.
Yes, very much so. And I would say, too, especially before the war, some of the major goods that they would take to market would have been hay. Hay was part of this big Atlantic trade where it was being sent down to the West Indies, some of the Great Britain.
So the triangular trade right now. Awesome.
Though, in that case, it was going.
Well, we go to England.
It would
Have to go
eventually
to England and then get back
right.
to where it needed to be in the West
Right.
Indies.
So that's what that was. Now, immediately around what becomes Washington's headquarters, that's a little different. That was a small industrial village. What becomes Washington's headquarters was actually a business residence and a mill house. There was a grist mill and a sawmill right out front along Valley Creek, and then further on there were 2 iron forges.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Valley Forge National Historical Park. In approximately 5 minutes, there will be a free 18-minute orientation film in the theater. The theater is in a separate building. To get to the theater, you would take the main stairway or the elevator to the upper level. Go out the glass doors, and the theater is the building on the left. Those wishing to see this film should proceed to the theater at this time.
We talk about the French explorers, this being, Alabama is a French area. And we talk about the creeks, the upper and lower, and then we have, 5 tribes that are in the Alabama area.
I would say back in 2013, I had the pleasure of doing some work studying under the guy who would just immediately after become a state historian for Tennessee. His complaint was, you could have an outhouse in Virginia. Boom, it goes all national register. But it takes so much more effort. Just
Exactly.
just because, you know, I mean, some things are identifiable more easily, and it takes more effort to galvanize support for it in other places. Okay, so in any case, so you had, around Washington's headquarters, you had 2 iron forges, a gristmill, a sawmill, a blacksmith, and then there would have been housing for the free and enslaved people that were all involved with that iron industry, as well as for the managers.
So that's the Valley Forge, it's the same, it's from the forges.
In part, it's
Okay.
a combination of Valley Creek plus Iron Forge, which
Wow,
were
okay.
along Valley Creek. Now, the forges and the sawmill that I mentioned, that's all destroyed in a British raid before the Continental Army even gets here in September of 1777, about a week after Brandywine. But that's kind of like the physical layout here. Now, when they get here, as I said, you're talking about the size of a city. You know, standing encampments, they're going to drain the area of its resources. When they move, it's just going to sap everything, whether you're talking about British or American. And the big problem that they had here, unfortunately, was not a cold winter. This actually wasn't the coldest winter they had. That is actually 2 years later in Morristown. The weather they had is very much like what they have today. We have today, lots of rain, not so much snow. The problem is that in October 1777, there's all this fighting that's going on around Philadelphia. The British have already captured the city. But in the midst of that, Congress had decided they're going to reorganize the supply department. Now, they're well-intentioned, but because of all the fighting, you know, that didn't get fully implemented. And there's a lot of confusion taking place about who's in charge of what, where the supplies are they properly stored, you know, all this stuff. So when the soldiers are marching in here, they don't necessarily even have a full uniform. There's some that are missing hats, others coats, stockings, shoes. Sounds cliche, but there are reports that they were leaving bloody tracks behind in the snow. And they're exhausted. There's no starvation. That's another common myth.
Yeah, I've heard that myth.
Yeah, there's no starvation here. Horses starved, but not soldiers. But there's this continual gnawing hunger because they are getting supplies, but they aren't getting them consistently. So, and if you think about all the hard labor they've got to do, and it's cold, this is rough. The huts you see out here, it's the first large-scale construction of living quarters that the Continental Army has ever had to do. And they didn't even have the proper tools to do it, the grindstones to sharpen those tools. So you're going to see, despite Washington's attempts at standardization, there's a little bit of everything. We know through archaeological excavations and documentation, sometimes the huts were shorter than what they were supposed to be. Sometimes the chimneys, they were supposed to be opposite the door. Sometimes they're in a corner off to the side. I mean, you had everything.
So it's like you had some man that had never built a cabin before, maybe.
In some instances, you had General Sullivan here, one of Washington's commanders. Right after they get here, he is given leadership of overseeing construction of the bridge across the Schuylkill River for supplies, communication, that sort of thing. He figures it's going to take 6 days. 5 days later, he's writing Washington complaining about all the things that are going wrong. And one of the things he's saying is that some of the brigades who were supposed to send him carpenters sent him tailors instead who had never used an axe in their lives, keeping their own carpenters with which to build the huts. So there's problems with, you know, just the labor as well. But you would have had a squad of 12 soldiers within each hut at minimum. Women and children are not kept separate from the rest of the army. They are living with their fathers, their husbands, with their sweethearts. You just pack them all in. So for your students, you know, I mean, what I often try to explain is, I mean, looking at a hut, a about the size of their bedroom probably at home. Maybe they've got to share it with some brothers or sisters, but you got to share it with all your brothers and sisters. If you don't have that many, add 3, because family sizes on average were a bit larger back then. Then you have to share it with your parents, and then 11 of your dad's colleagues for 6 months in pretty filthy conditions. And that is not a Tempur-Pedic mattress you're going to find in there. It's lumpy straw. That straw's going to get wet, and when it gets wet, it's going to rot. And stink, and goodness knows what wants to live in that straw. So just sheer resources that these men require. Washington, the day after he got here, he issued out a proclamation saying, that was printed in the newspapers and even translated in German, because there's a smattering of German-speaking peoples in this area. And that proclamation basically stated that he was going to take up all the hay within a 70-mile radius of his headquarters, because that's how much they needed for bedding for the roofs. Some of the roofs would be thatched with straw for some of the livestock here. Now, he's not going to get all 70 miles because the British are just 18 miles away, but he's going to try. But he puts this out because he wants to give the residents time to actually get their grain out and removed, because he needs that straw. But that gives you an idea as to just the sheer resources. We're just talking about one thing here. So Washington, he chose Valley Forge in part because it had the high ground. You can see if the British are going to attack him. Thankfully, they never did. Please do, cheater. They never did attack here. So he chooses it because he's got the high ground here. They entrench themselves here and build these different defenses, so that's going to help. By this point, there's nothing of real strategic value for the British, and the roads that were, even though they're bad for getting supplies in, it also meant that the British couldn't bring their cannon in here and attack. But if you come on over here, this is a model of some of the defenses that we have here.
Now, what would this serve?
Oh, I'll let you know. So this is called, this is a model of a redoubt. A redoubt is French, a French word. It means a place of refuge or a place of retreat. The French were considered experts at siegecraft and engineering at this time. And for the Continental Army, throughout the war, their defenses, any engineering works was generally overseen by a French or Polish officer. So the way they actually made these, think about what I like to ask kids is if they've ever built a sandcastle or a snow fort, something like that. And they don't really tend to last all that long because they get pummeled. You've got erosion from the weather, things like that. So you got the same principle here. You can't just pack a bunch of soil on top of the ground and expect that to actually protect anybody. So you got to reinforce the walls really well. So what they would do is the soldiers would build what's called these gabions here. That's those little baskets. In actuality, they'd be between 3 to 6 feet tall, several feet wide. They're weaving them together like baskets, but they don't have any bottoms to them. And then they stack them really tightly together like you see here. And then in front of all that, the soldiers start digging this ditch. And everything that they're digging, the soil, the rocks, the tree roots, they get thrown into these gabions.
Oh, wow.
And over the top of those, you've got phrases, which are these big bundles of stakes. Or excuse me, not phrases. What is it? Those are phrases.
The kids are used
Fascines.
Okay.
They're called fascines. The even bigger ones are called saucissons, which is actually French for a dry cured sausage.
Oh, wow.
And then the stakes that are sticking out of the walls, those are the phrases.
Okay.
Okay, so this creates a really sturdy structure that's been able to withstand a lot of pummeling, whether it's weather.
So it looks like
attacks.
this on the outside once they construct it.
Right, but they built 5 of these readouts here. One of them is close to stop number 2, the Muhlenberg Brigade huts. and you can actually go inside that one. But these would have anchored the defenses at strategic high points all throughout.
Do you know if this is what it looked like at Yorktown? Is this the same type?
I
of
worked at
readouts?
Yorktown. Yes, it is.
Cool, because the kids get to go up and adventure over the they're called readouts. Is that what
Yes.
they're called? And they get to climb them, and I know my son did when he went to Yorktown. And I think that's just so wow. I didn't realize. Now, when did they do an archaeological dig to find these, to discover this, or they just found the plans for it?
With the one that's out by Muhlenberg Brigade, there was some, like an Air Force aircraft that flew over, I want to say in the 1940s or so, and they spotted,
Wow.
like the impression of it. So they know that there's some conjecture, there's some argument that it might have been located elsewhere, but still roughly nearby. But yeah,
It's so cool though, the way that and if they left the sticks up, it almost would act like a defense too, because as the ground was packed over it, those sticks would be poking up out of the ground.
Yeah, probably.
Possibly.
But you have various shapes. They could be squared off, but then you also have what's called like a star readout. Like Fort 96 is a classic example. We
Right.
have one here too.
Okay.
But that's what they're building, and that was actually done. They were usually overseen by a French or Polish officer. Here it was done by this guy, Louis Lebec du Portail. He came over 9 months prior in March of 1777 as part of a secret agreement between Benjamin Franklin and Louis XVI of France.
Oh wow.
So he's the one that's actually overseeing, laying out all the defenses, deciding where the brigades are going to encamp, things like that.
Now these are tools that they used.
Yes. So you have fascine knives, shovels, axes, picks.
I've never heard of that term before.
Fascine, yeah. By referring to a bundle of sticks.
Okay.
So you have the soldiers doing this hard labor. They're also, of course, drilling constantly, especially under Steuben, the Prussian
That's-
drill master.
Right. Tell us his whole name again.
Actually, it changes frequently. And I even refrain from calling him von Steuben, which the American commanders, or the commanders within the Continental Army did call him. However, he was a Francophile, and he generally spoke French here.
Oh.
Because French was the standard military language and the language of diplomacy. And for that reason, because he was a Francophile, he referred to himself as De Steuben. And just
Not hear that.
kind of
We see it, and the kids will watch it this year. We'll watch Liberty Kids, and on Liberty Kids, that's one of the episodes. Is where he comes in to Valley Forge and is trying to shape them into soldiers at that time.
Oh, yes. Now, there's a common misconception that he misrepresented himself in terms of, his rank showing up here. That's not true, because frankly, he didn't speak a lick of English or read it when he first came here. He actually was discovered by Benjamin Franklin, who saw his potential. He's the one that doctored his resume, and Steuben had no idea, because he didn't know what was on the paper. So, but he did prove to be quite effective in drilling the troops and getting them more unified. Creating a more professional, disciplined army as Washington had wanted. But of course, you don't necessarily have just the soldiers here, and you have a variety of different peoples. So, for example, I mentioned the women earlier.
Wow, look at the shoes. Look at the shoes.
And those would be like an overshoe that you could wear through the mud and the weather and everything.
Oh my gosh, is this leather?
Hard to tell. I think so, yes. Okay, so for the women here, primarily they're going to be working, if they're on the ration, part of the Continental Army. They're in this weird nebulous zone because they're part of the Continental Army because they're getting paid and they're getting rations. They're subject to Army discipline and regulations and punishments, but they're still civilians. Primarily they're going to be working as laundresses. Now this is not fun. It's hardly glorious. It's backbreaking labor. But I will tell you, they knew the value of their work because they were excellent businesswomen. You have throughout the war these officers and soldiers complaining about how these washwomen are fleecing them of their wages.
Thimble. I just want to make sure my kids did it's called a non-dirt dig, and they found a thimble in it, you know, and so I just want them to see what one would look like that's that old.
Occasionally they might do some small repairs for if they were contracted to do so.
Would they be considered patriots if you could trace back a person who was stationed here with their husband at Valley Forge? Would they be considered a patriot?
Well, for the patriot cause, for the cause of independence.
Like if you're looking for your Daughters of the American Revolution, I just wonder.
I think so.
Because I know my grandmother's considered one who has a statue in her honor at Battle Bluff Courthouse.
Yeah, I'm not
Okay.
privy to their rules and regulations.
Okay.
I think that might be the case, but I
I
think
would
it
think
also
so, especially if they
depends.
were helping take care of the
Right,
soldiers.
but unfortunately, I'm not
Okay.
absolutely certain. You know, you have like the Society of Cincinnati for the officers and things like that. So there's
I've learned about that this trip.
So you have women here. They might also act in some sort of nursing capacity. Now, this isn't like a standardized nursing corps like you have later on in the 19th century. Nobody really wanted to work in hospitals because at the time, hospitals, if you're going to have them, they're either with the military or they're in urban spaces, and they're kind of like dying places. They're not the sterile research facilities we have. So, and pay was poor for nurses, at least in the beginning of the war. I mean, you got a high chance of getting sick, maybe dying. So nobody really.
They didn't know about
did
germs
too much.
back then.
No, they didn't. They could see the bacteria through a microscope, but they don't know what they and viruses can do. And unfortunately, that's one of the big reasons why Valley Forge is famous, is because you had about 1,700 to 2,000 soldiers that died of epidemic disease here, usually in general hospitals off-site. So they're catching influenza and pneumonia, but you have thousands of people that are cooking, washing, bathing. They've got limited resources for water.
They're reusing water.
Right, so they're catching dysentery and typhoid. Because of that, you have typhus from the body lice. It was just a real mess. So,
Wow.
but in any case, in addition, we also had the majority of American Indians that are that were involved with the American Revolution. The majority of them, if they did take a side, they usually sided with the British because they were afraid that if the and I'm being very general here. You know, a lot of these things can get very technical here, or detailed. But they were afraid that if the Americans won their independence, that there would be expansion westward into their own territories.
And it happened.
Right. But there might be some that are more close. Their traditional lands might be closer to American townships and settlements, and you know they do heavy trade, and you know maybe some friendships and alliances struck, or you know they might be going through some of the same problems that some of the other colonists are towards the British, you know things like that. So for the Oneida and the Tuscarora, they are part of the Six Nations, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, otherwise known as the Iroquois. You don't generally want to call them the Iroquois because it means snake people. That's what their enemies called them. But they actually broke from the rest of the Confederacy. I'm speaking in general terms. And they sided with the Americans.
They were the two that sided with there were two of them that decided with, right?
Right. Maine too. There was a member of a gentleman named Colonel Lewis Cook, who was originally a member of the St. Regis Mohawk, who was leading Oneidas here as well. But there was a delegation that came here to Valley Forge, and according to Oneida oral histories, there's a woman, one of their most most revered figures in their history, Holly Cooper. They brought several hundred bushels of white corn with which to feed the colonists here. Now, white corn actually needs some special preparation in order for it to be consumed, for it to be edible. And so she, according to this, taught the colonists how to do this. But a few years ago, we had a delegation. Unfortunately, this was before my time, but they gifted the park with this wonderful wampum belt.
That is awesome. And is that a powder horn of the natives and of the Iroquois? Or is this? It says 1774. It looks like Arasagi.
Actually, that might have been belonging to an enslaved individual.
Oh wow!
Now,
I took a picture of it.
you did have a mix of African Americans here. There were some that were enslaved, might act as a domestic servant for an officer. For instance, Hannah Till, part of Washington's household, she worked as an enslaved cook there. But in the case of some regiments, particularly from Massachusetts and Rhode Island, you had African Americans who were fighting in return for their freedom. Rhode Island in particular, the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, there were several that enlisted and immediately upon enlistment received emancipation. So that was rather controversial. It didn't last too long, but they were certainly here. And then later on, when you get to Yorktown, the Rhode Island Regiment there was noted by French officers to be among the best.
Wow,
Within the
that's interesting. Before I leave, I want to go back to the computer where it says the family.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think they did, but I looked at that.
I won't get too gory.
This is.
Now, one of the things that I mentioned how horrible the disease situation was here.
If you turn it, it's not going to probably turn. It'll be upside down. I'm sorry. That's okay.
Fortunately for the Continental Army here, there was one disease that they were able to get under control, and that was smallpox, which had been plaguing the Army since 1775.
I remember hearing this.
Yeah, when they leave out of here, when they march out, they've actually conducted one of the first large-scale state mandated mass immunization programs in history. And they did that through inoculation, which is actually a precursor to vaccination. But it required the soldiers to be quarantined for up to a month.
Now, I forgot, how did they do it? Did they just expose them to the disease?
What happened usually is they would take, this is a little different but not too far off, they would take a blade similar to this, called a French or thumb lancet, and they would create a shallow incision either in the arm or the hand. Sometimes they did 2 incisions on one arm or an incision on each arm. But then they would take the pus from an infected individual, somebody who already had it. They know at this time to get it from a milder case, especially if someone's already been inoculated, and that's how they got the pustules, the pock marks. So they take that pus, they put it on the blade, the flat side of the blade, and they just kind of rub that in. Sometimes they take a piece of thread and they would soak it in the pus and then put it into the incision and then cover it up
Yeah, exactly.
with a plaster. This is different from vaccination because you still get the disease, but it's a much milder form of it. Smallpox at this time could kill 12 to 34% of all those infected, depending on the situation. There are some rare cases of it, rare versions like the hemorrhagic version where it's almost always fatal. So for instance, if you were pregnant, you'd almost always get the hemorrhagic version and almost certainly die, unfortunately.
That's awful.
But with inoculation, it was reported that not 1 out of every 1,000 would die, which with today's, if you're looking at 1,000 when we've got 300 million people in this country, that's, CDC wouldn't be too thrilled. But for back then, that was fantastic odds. So Washington was able to get his troops inoculated. He had started this a year prior, but over in Morristown. But when he gets here to Valley Forge, he finds out that 3,000 to 4,000 of his regular soldiers, despite having long-term enlistments, they haven't gotten it. So he's got to start it all up again. But this helps maintain military strength, especially with his regular
Welcome to Valley
troops.
Forge National Historical Park.
Wow.
The next show is
Okay, question.
will begin in the park theater.
Are these rollers?
Yeah, for the wigs, the perukes.
My kids have done on the same non-dirt dig. They discovered these
Oh,
and they have to
yeah.
identify them. So those are the rollers for the wigs.
At Ferry Farm, which was childhood home for George Washington, they found a ton of those because he never wore a wig.
Or Thomas
But-
Jefferson.
Yeah, but his father did. And
Okay. Now what are these over here?
now that one I kind of tend to go to steer away from because that's a fleam, and while it was used for medical reasons, much like that lancet would be, that was more common in veterinary practice.
Oh wow. And one other thing back here on this one. Are these for cauterizing?
For cauterizing bullet injuries from musket balls from being shot.
Yeah.
Now, there weren't any battles fought here.
Right.
But there was an engagement Lafayette had at Barron Hill in May, which might be possible that they used that there. This is actually called a tooth key. There were different instruments for pulling teeth. This particular one is for the molars in the lower jaw. So basically, you take that hook, you put it over the top of the crown of the tooth, and what do you do with the key?
You turn
You
it.
turn it. Oh, yeah. Keep in mind that even a minor medical operation at this time could cause an infection and thus kill you. Now, amputations, not so much from battle, of course, not here, but Lafayette did say that because the soldiers were lacking clothing, that oftentimes their limbs became so frozen they turned black.
Frostbite.
And it was often necessary to amputate.
Oh my gosh. This is so awesome. So fantastic.
So I hope this helps.
Yes, it does.
Yes.
And thank you so much. And
You're
your name
welcome.
is Jennifer Bolton. Well, it's nice to. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're
My
welcome.
kids are gonna love this. I appreciate it.